Nobody expected Lisa Weiss to say it out loud, especially not like this. One moment, everything felt normal, and the next, the room shifted. Her words hit hard, fast, and without apology, leaving Doug and Joni Lamb caught completely off guard. The reaction was instant. Faces froze. Social media exploded. Supporters argued. Critics pounced. And viewers at home asked the same question. How long had this been building? What sounded like a single statement quickly turned into a full-blown storm. And fans haven't stopped talking since. To the world, Doug and Lisa Weiss looked like the couple every Christian family wanted to be. On stage, they were picture-perfect, smiling, holding hands, sharing lessons about love and faith. Doug spoke with authority. Lisa stood beside him with grace. Together, they built a ministry that promised healing, guidance, and strong marriages. People tuned in, took notes, and told their friends, this is what godly love looks like. But what no one saw was the slow unraveling happening behind their polished smiles. At home, things were different. The applause faded, and so did the connection. Lisa found herself eating dinner alone more often than not. Doug was always busy with the ministry, rushing out to meetings, interviews, or writing another book. The man who once prayed with her every night now fell asleep on the couch with his laptop still open. The warmth in his voice that inspired thousands didn't make it home. He was a presence in the house, but never fully there. Lisa tried everything to bridge the gap. She cooked his favorite meals, left sweet notes on his desk, and prayed constantly. She told herself it was just a rough season, that all marriages went through this. But the silence stretched longer, and her hope grew thinner. Doug, the counselor who helped others reconnect, seemed more and more disconnected from her. Behind the scenes, Lisa began to feel invisible. Doug would speak at conferences about listening to your spouse, about deep emotional connection, and she'd sit in the front row, clapping with the rest of the crowd, her heart sinking.
And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about, that Pete. The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home, that Pete is a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her. I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign.
He preached love so well, but stopped practicing it at home. Lisa's world became one of quiet loneliness, where she was more a supporter than a partner. The perfect marriage people admired was a role they played, not a reality they lived. And slowly, Lisa began to realize she was no longer part of a love story. She was part of a performance. It didn't happen all at once. The breaking point rarely does. For Lisa Weiss, it will me slowly, like a quiet storm building over time. Small moments, small heartbreaks, stacked one on top of the other. At first, she didn't even know she was breaking. She was just tired. Tired of the silence. Tired of sitting across from someone who used to know her so deeply and now barely saw her at all. Tired of pretending everything was fine when her heart was unraveling one thread at a time. Doug was always busy. That was the explanation, the excuse, the shield. You know how packed this week is, he'd say. We'll talk soon. But soon never came. Lisa would sit by herself at the dinner table, his plate untouched, the food going cold. He was either in his office writing, filming, counseling, or already asleep with a laptop open on his chest. He had sermons about emotional connection, strong, passionate messages that made people cry. But Lisa hadn't felt connected to him in years. She used to cry at night, quietly. She didn't want to disturb him, didn't want to create drama. Instead, she would bury her face in her pillow and whisper to God in the dark, "Please fix this. Please bring him back to me." But over time, her prayers stopped asking for healing. They started asking for clarity, for strength, for the truth. One night, something shifted. Doug was in his office again, pacing while rehearsing a new message. Lisa stood quietly in the hallway, watching. His words were beautiful, about seeing your spouse, truly seeing them, about being present and emotionally available. He sounded like a man who understood everything she needed, but as she watched him speak, something inside her cracked. His tone was perfect, his message polished, but none of it was for her. It was a performance, a message crafted for strangers, not the woman standing 10 feet away. That was the moment it became real. Lisa turned, walked to their bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She just stared at the floor and felt the weight of it all settle into her chest. Not a sudden pain, but a quiet understanding. He wasn't coming back. Not tonight. Not ever. The man she married, the one who saw her, cherished her, prayed with her, was gone. What was left was a public figure, a brand, and she had been living in the shadow of that brand for far too long. The next morning, she didn't say anything dramatic. No screaming, no confrontation. She just started writing. A journal she kept hidden in the back of her closet. Page after page poured out. Not about anger, but about loss. Not about blame, but about loneliness. She wrote down the things she never said out loud. I miss being seen. I feel like a ghost in this house. I don't know who I am anymore. Writing became her way back to herself. For the first time in years, she had something that belonged only to her. Her words, her truth, not filtered through ministry or image or expectations, just raw, honest, broken thoughts on paper. Slowly, her days started to change. She started waking up earlier, not to clean or prepare Doug's schedule, but to take walks. She didn't tell anyone at first. She just slipped out into the early morning air, letting the wind touch her face, watching the sun rise over the quiet streets. Those walks became sacred. It was the only time she didn't feel like someone's wife, someone's assistant, someone's shadow. During one of those walks, she realized something strange. She was breathing easier, not because the pain had vanished, but because she had stopped pretending it wasn't there. That honesty was freeing. Even if she wasn't ready to speak to the world, she had at least started speaking to herself. But the world didn't wait. One evening, she got a message from a friend. Did you see the photo? Lisa didn't know what it meant. She opened her phone and there it was. Doug, smiling. Not just smiling, beaming. Next to Joni Lamb. The caption read, "A new chapter. God is faithful." Lisa felt her stomach twist. The ink on their divorce papers was barely dry. She hadn't even told all their friends yet. And there he was, reborn, remarried, rebranded. She stared at that picture for a long time. Not because she was surprised, but because of how familiar it looked. The same stage smile, the same rehearsed tone in the caption, and a woman beside him playing the part Lisa had once played. It was like watching her life get recast. That was the final nudge, the moment that turned quiet reflection into something louder. Lisa didn't plan a big announcement. She didn't go to the press. She just spoke. One honest video, a few minutes long. Calm, not accusing, just real. She didn't name names or attack character. She talked about being invisible in a marriage that looked perfect. About praying until her voice was hoarse. About realizing that love without presence is just performance. People listened. Some were shocked. Others quietly nodded. Many reached out saying, I thought I was the only one. It wasn't the drama that moved them. It was the honesty. The way she spoke with heartbreak, but also with peace. She had nothing to prove, no reputation to protect. She just didn't want to live a lie anymore. Doug didn't respond publicly. Joni didn't either. The ministry carried on, like it always had. But something had changed. Lisa's words cracked open a door that had been sealed shut for too long. Behind that door were countless women with the same story. Not all married to pastors. Not all in the public eye, but all carrying the weight of silence. Lisa didn't expect applause. She didn't want a platform. She just wanted to tell the truth, for herself. To finally say the things she had whispered to God for years, but never dared say out loud. And once she did, something remarkable happened. The guilt lifted. The shame faded. She stopped wondering if she was the problem. She stopped trying to shrink to fit into a role that had never truly been hers. That was her breaking point, but also her beginning. Not the end of a marriage, the start of a life. Her life. The fallout didn't come with fireworks. It didn't come with angry headlines or shouting matches on screens. It came in quieter ways, colder, sharper. It came through silence, through glances not returned, through spaces that used to be filled with warmth and were now just empty. After Lisa Weiss finally spoke her truth, after years of smiling through the pain and standing behind a man who seemed to forget she even existed, she felt something unexpected: peace. For a moment, it was enough. Telling her story was like taking off a coat she had worn for too long, heavy, suffocating, stitched with the expectations of a public marriage. She had spoken not with rage, but with clarity, with a trembling voice that grew steadier with each word. And the people listened. But then came the aftershock. At first, it was small, a few unanswered texts. Friends she'd known for years suddenly too busy to call back. Ministry couples who used to invite her to dinner now pretending not to see her name online. Lisa tried to convince herself it was just the noise. Everyone needed time to process. But deep down, she knew this wasn't confusion. This was rejection. The Christian world she had been part of for decades, the one she helped build, the one she served faithfully in, was turning its back on her. Quietly, politely, but completely. Doug was still the name on the conference flyers, still shaking hands, still being introduced as a man of wisdom and grace. Now he had Joni beside him, poised, respected, with her own influence and followers. Together, they looked like a power couple heaven had orchestrated. People reposted their photos with hashtags like God's Plan and Restoration. Lisa, meanwhile, was being erased. Invitations stopped. Churches that once asked her to speak didn't return emails. Her name was removed from websites she helped build. People didn't talk about her, they talked around her, as if acknowledging her would somehow disrupt the fairy tale now playing out in public. She would walk into events and feel eyes glance her way, then away. Conversations that used to feel warm now turned stiff. She was no longer Lisa Weiss, part of a respected ministry. She was Lisa, the ex-wife, and not just an ex-wife, but the one who made it public. She should have handled it privately. She's ruining his reputation. She's bitter. The whispers came fast. They didn't know the nights she cried alone while he preached love on stage. They didn't know the way her heart sank every time he said, "I'm too busy," when she reached out. But the public didn't need details. They had already chosen sides, and they picked the one with better lighting, a nicer smile, and the bigger platform. The hardest part wasn't the rumors. It wasn't even the silence. It was being made to feel like her truth didn't matter. Like her pain was a distraction, like she was causing division, when all she did was tell the story of how she'd been slowly broken in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. At night, she would stare at her phone, watching videos of Doug and Joni laughing together on camera. He never looked back, never paused, just kept moving forward, like she'd never existed. It hurt, not because she wanted him back, but because she once believed their love was real, because she had fought for it, stayed through the hard seasons, sacrificed more than she ever admitted, and now she was being replaced with a smile and a caption. Her children saw it too. They were old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to read the comments, to feel the sting of watching their father praised for overcoming heartbreak when they knew who had done most of the hurting. They saw their mother sitting quietly on the couch, holding back tears while the world praised the man who left. And still, Lisa never responded with bitterness. She didn't post angry videos. She didn't fight back in public. She just kept walking through the silence, one step at a time. Some days the pain was too heavy. She'd sit in her car outside the grocery store, gripping the steering wheel, unable to go inside because her hands were shaking. She never thought grief could feel this physical, like something pressing on her chest, like she couldn't get a full breath. But the real heartbreak came from the church. From people who once told her she was a role model, from women who used to seek her advice. They vanished. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make her feel like faith had conditions. Like support came only when you stayed quiet and smiled through the pain. And still, she didn't stop believing. Her faith, though shaken, remained. Not in people, not in polished ministries, but in the God who sat with her in the dark, who listened when no one else did. The God she prayed to at 2 a.m. when her house felt too big and her heart felt too small to hold all the hurt. Lisa began to find comfort in the quiet, in slow mornings with coffee, in walks through her neighborhood, in handwritten notes from strangers who said, "Thank you for telling the truth." She started to realize that being rejected by the crowd was not the same as being wrong, that sometimes walking away from what looked perfect was the only way to find what's real. The aftershock didn't destroy her, but it changed her. It taught her who was really in her corner. It taught her how deep loneliness can cut, but it also taught her how strong she really was. Lisa Weiss may have been rejected in public, but in private, she was reclaiming her power, not with noise, not with revenge, but with truth, with grace, and with the quiet strength of a woman who knew that survival wasn't the end of her story, just the beginning. At first, Lisa Weiss didn't know what reclaiming her voice would even look like. For years, her identity had been wrapped up in someone else's spotlight, carefully folded beneath the layers of a picture-perfect life. The good wife, the quiet partner, the woman behind the man. She had spent decades speaking softly so others could speak louder, so when the lights went out and the applause stopped, she was left with a silence so deep it almost swallowed her. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. She started to hear herself again. It didn't come in a loud, dramatic way. There was no grand moment, no movie scene transformation. It came slowly, quietly, like a whisper at first. The kind of whisper that gently nudges you when you're lying in bed, eyes wide open at 3 a.m., wondering who you are without the roles you've always played. For Lisa, it began with one small decision. She stopped apologizing for the truth. She didn't apologize for hurting. She didn't apologize for speaking. And she didn't apologize for walking away from a marriage that had long stopped feeling like home. That first step, though terrifying, was the beginning of something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. And with freedom came clarity. Lisa started to remember the woman she was before the stage, before the cameras, before the ministry headlines and social media posts and quiet sacrifices. She remembered the girl who loved to write, who once dreamed of telling stories that mattered. She remembered the woman who used to laugh without checking if it was the right moment, who prayed because she believed, not because she was expected to perform faith for an audience. It wasn't easy. Rebuilding never is. There were days when grief still knocked her breath out, days when she'd walk past a mirror and see the shadows of who she used to be, days when she questioned everything. Had it all been fake? Was she ever truly seen, truly loved? But even in those moments, something in her had shifted. Instead of pushing those feelings down, she let them rise. She journaled, she wept, she talked to God without holding anything back. And most of all, she stayed honest, with herself and with others. The people who mattered stayed. A few old friends came back around, saying, "We're sorry, we should have stood by you." New ones appeared too, women who had heard her story and said, "I thought I was alone." Lisa realized that her pain had given her something she never expected, a purpose. She didn't go back to the old world of polished events and scripted panels. She started small: coffee shops, living rooms, women's groups that weren't looking for a celebrity, but for someone who would look them in the eye and say, "I get it." She told her story, not to expose, not to hurt, but to heal. She talked about the nights she cried beside a man who never noticed, about losing her voice in a marriage that looked like a dream from the outside, about trying to be everything for everyone until she realized she was nothing to herself. And the more she told it, the lighter she felt. The shame started to fall away, and in its place came strength. Her words weren't polished. They didn't need to be. They were raw and real, and that's what made them powerful. Lisa began to write again. This time not in journals hidden in drawers, but in essays, in blog posts, in notes she shared with women going through the same kind of quiet heartbreak. She received messages from people she'd never met, thanking her for her honesty. Some said, "You gave me the courage to leave." Others said, "You reminded me who I was." And Lisa? She began to believe it too. Her home started to feel different, warmer, softer, not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer pretending. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. She lit candles not for aesthetics, but for herself. She played worship music not to fill the air, but to feed her soul. She planted flowers in the backyard, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the time or the energy for. And slowly, the ending she once feared started to look like a beginning. Doug's world moved on. The headlines faded, replaced by new ones. His marriage to Joni was still public, still praised, still packaged as divine timing. But Lisa no longer flinched when she saw their names together. It didn't matter anymore. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it no longer owned her. She wasn't trying to win a narrative or change anyone's mind. She didn't need to. Her life was no longer about proving anything. It was about living honestly, even when it wasn't tidy. Especially when it wasn't tidy. There were still lonely days. Divorce leaves strange echoes behind. Memories that come back in the grocery aisle, in old songs, in the way someone says a name. But those moments didn't crush her the way they used to. Now they reminded her of how far she'd come. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't broken. She was rebuilding. Not in the spotlight, but in the quiet moments of truth. Not with applause, but with purpose. Not to prove someone wrong, but to become someone whole. One night, while looking through old photos, ones where she and Doug smiled on stage hand in hand, Lisa paused. She didn't cry. She didn't turn away. She looked at the woman in the picture and whispered, "Thank you for surviving." That version of her, the one who stood tall while quietly falling apart, had paved the way for the woman she was now. Stronger, softer, wiser. Lisa no longer needed to be the wife behind the ministry or the silent partner in a story written by someone else. She was the author now, and this time she was writing with truth, with faith, and with a voice that couldn't be silenced again. Her ending wasn't what she imagined, but maybe it was exactly what she needed. Not a fairy tale, not a scandal, just a new beginning. Real, honest, hers.